I dripped with rainwater as I stood in line at Laura's Liquor. Having the only commercial-grade coffee machine in town, Laura was known for her strong, smooth espresso, a side hustle offered to help offset the harsh hangovers of those who imbibed her wide array of spirits. On this dark, soggy Cordova morning, I wanted coffee. Ahead of me was a younger man, late 30s, slim-hipped, wearing fishing bibs and a ball cap with the Alaska state flag on it. His face was brown and leathery, a telltale sign of his Eyak ancestry and years of exposure to harsh winds and salt water. After the barista handed him his coffee, he stepped aside to allow me to place my order. "A double shot latte, please." I opened my wallet to pay the cashier. The native still sipping his coffee beside me caught notice of my Arizona driver's license. I'd only recently moved to Cordova and had yet to visit the Alaska DMV. "Arizona, huh?" "Yeah, Arizona." I deposited the change into my wallet. "Whereabouts?" Tucson, right on the south rim of the Grand Canyon." "And who owns the Grand Canyon?" An odd question. "The National Park Service has jurisdiction," I offered. "No, it belongs to the natives." "Ah, I see. It was a trick question," I replied, trying to remain friendly but not wanting to entertain even 1 minute of a territorial debate. "It's not a trick question. We own it." I wanted to point out that he was Eyak, not Navajo or Hopi or Havasu, and was no more entitled to the Grand Canyon than I was to Germany for being Caucasian. But instead, I elected to raise my cup in a sort of mock toast, then bid him a nice day as I stepped back into the bitter coastal rains. The truth is, no one owns the Grand Canyon, not the tribes, nor the Park Service. The canyon has a standalone presence with a pulse all on its own, and I'm not referring to the flora and fauna. It's a geologic marvel, an extraordinary, imposing gash on a rather ordinary desert scape. With its reputation of missing persons, fatalities, rare weather events, and inexplicable aerial phenomena, the Grand Canyon tends to command a certain respect when visitors dare to step within its boundary. I transferred to northern Arizona in fall of 2006. I'd been given a choice between 2 government houses in a small, never-to-be privately owned community, delightfully named Lincoln Log Loop. During my initial visit to the area, my youngest sister accompanied me to offer support and unsolicited wisdom. Of the 2 available homes, she convincingly suggested the house with the south-facing deck, a backyard that butted up against primitive lodgepole forest and garish blue carpet throughout. A carpet that I never grew to accept during my 2 years of occupancy. When my sister returned to Red Mesa, the loneliness was palpable. I had a new job in a foreign, albeit beautiful, place. I knew no one and was uncertain where to begin prioritizing my responsibilities. On top of it all, life as I knew it lay in taped cardboard boxes. I had to start work early, so I showered, built a small fire in the wood stove, and set the coffee up on the kitchen counter. I spread several file folders across the dining room table and began familiarizing myself with the details. These were open cases that I, as the new Forest Service law enforcement officer, would be expected to solve. Less than an hour into my reading, I heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen. I immediately jumped up to investigate. It sounded like a group of mops and brooms had fallen, their wooden handles clattering to the ground. But when I walked into the kitchen, I found nothing responsible for the crash. What I did find, however, was that the cupboards were open and the coffee maker had been turned on. It burbled and hissed as it continued to brew. I didn't know how to define what was happening. I just closed the cupboards and turned off the coffee maker. My other sister, I have 2, said she was awakened in the night by the toilet flushing on its own. She heard the handle drop and the tank filling, but no one was in the bathroom. It was almost as though I had an uninvited roommate with free room and board. The Kaibab forest is adjacent to the south rim of the Grand Canyon. As part of my field patrol, I was to routinely inspect the lookout tower that sits atop Red Butte, the only prominent topographical relief in a softly undulating forest. Reaching over 7,000 feet from the forest floor, Red Butte offers a view of the San Francisco peaks to the southeast and the rim of the Grand Canyon to the north. It was also a place of unpermitted touch-and-go landings by a local helicopter company. In an effort to obtain evidence of this alleged unauthorized activity, I placed a trail camera along the ridgeline. When I returned to retrieve the camera, I found skid patterns in the soft soil, but I'd only captured photographs of darkness or drifting snow. Truth be told, I was less interested in helicopter activity and more intrigued by the atmosphere of Red Butte. The moment I stepped from my patrol vehicle and onto the fiery-colored trail leading to the lookout, I bristled. Not as one bristles in opposition, but rather an electric bristling, as though my senses were on high alert. A degree of this might be attributed to the Kaibab firefighter lookouts retelling of the murder that occurred here decades prior. In 1972, the fire lookout, Addie Lee Venturini, was killed at the hands of Thomas J. Smith. Using a pipe wrench, an ice pick, and a pistol, Smith brutally murdered Miss Venturini, then fled into the forest. He was later discovered from the Red Butte lookout vantage point when one of the patrols saw the sun glinting off a shiny object. It turned out to be the side mirror of Smith's vehicle, parked deep within the pinyon pine. Smith was pronounced dead on the scene, having taken his own life. While the story is undeniably tragic and certainly presents its own edginess, I can't say with certainty it had any direct relation to the strange phenomena I experienced on Red Butte. From the trailhead to the lookout, it's 1¼ miles, with approximately 900 feet in elevation gain. The dust and shale beneath the hiker's feet is a robust palette of color: red, salmon, and orange, with rocky outcrops and sweet scents of juniper. I seldom saw other people in the vicinity when I made the steep climb to check trail cameras, or to verify the lookout cabin and tower were secure. There's a steep point on the northwest side of the butte that displays a majestic, unobstructed view of the surrounding Kaibab. The wind tends to channel through this opening, cooling the sweat off heat-weary hikers. Whenever I'd climb, I'd pause briefly at this point and sip water. One afternoon in early spring, I could hear a man speaking. I scanned the trail ahead, but the path was empty. I spun around to find the trail behind was vacant as well. Silence, except for the wind pushing through the dense boughs of the pinyon. Then the voice began again, soon joined by several others. I hadn't seen any vehicles at the trailhead and had hiked a pretty good clip to have been caught by a group of hikers so soon. There had to be people up on the ridge visiting the lookout, possibly an acoustic illusion born of rock and desert winds. I tucked my water bottle into my pack and trotted up the last steep switchback. When I broke into the refreshing open of Red Butte's crest, I found myself alone. No hikers, no fire lookout. There weren't even skid depressions in the soil from another helicopter touchdown. When I got back from patrol, I told my sisters about the experience. If they were skeptical, they hid it well. And not long after, the sister who encountered the toilet flushing apparition would hear the same jumble of voices at the same overlook. It sounded like a group of people conversing, but at a volume level that made any dialogue impossible to discern. And it wasn't the only place on Red Butte where I heard voices, without an apparent source, echoing through the desert. Once I was working on a case involving resource damage on the south side of the Butte. I was to document my findings and include them in an incident report, the details of which would determine whether the permittee had egregiously violated their contract. Since it was a bit of a drive to arrive at this location, I decided to make the most of my time and hike to the top of Red Butte from the site of my investigation. After taking photographs and adding GPS locations to my notes, I started to ascend along the ridge leading to the fire lookout tower. The day was warm but far from the unbearable heat typically associated with Arizona's scorched and arid climate. An up-canyon breeze lofted in from the east, gaining speed as it crested the ridge. It refreshed my mind and made me appreciative of having a job that allowed me to spend time in the high desert. Then the wind changed. Carried with it were voices. Only this time I heard children, laughing, chatting, the white noise of a grade school classroom. Loose rocks skittered ahead of my boots as I side-hilled my way to the edge of a precipice. The voices continued, appearing to sound as if they were in and among the sandstone pillars below me. No one appeared. No one ever did. The voices eventually faded, and the winds filled the void where little children should have been gathered. By now, the voices were a familiar anomaly, and not alarming, so much as it was frustrating to hear something that was impossible to see. When I arrived at the fire lookout, I pulled my trail cam from its concealed position and placed it securely in my pack. I took a quick break in the shade of the tower to eat my lunch and cautiously assess the billowing thunderheads in the west. Storms in Arizona are beautifully violent and can manifest quickly, often trapping hikers in shallow shelters to wait out its torrential passing. By the time I had performed security checks on the tower's doors and tanks, the metal gray clouds of this fast-approaching storm had enveloped the sky overhead. A white flash, then 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then a deep, powerful rumble I could feel in my chest. Too close for me to make it down the butte without getting wet, but perhaps there would be time to get to my patrol vehicle and out onto the pavement before the dirt roads became a slurry of red mud. I hurried off the ridge and down the south-facing slope toward the road where my vehicle was parked. Another flash and the 2 Mississippi count caused me to all but run over the outcroppings and foolishly duck beneath mature pinions to seek protection from the storm. The clouds rolled dark and heavy across the sky, swallowing the mid-afternoon sun and pouring sheets of black rain across the desert floor. Suddenly, the air shifted. I felt like I was in a vacuum, with the sound muffled and the air taking on a sense of thickness. The ridgeline going up appeared to level off, and my sense of direction spun around me. Just keep moving down the butte. But the butte had changed. Thunder cracked closely now, and the rain began to tap loudly against my pack. I witnessed an isolated downpour creeping upslope toward me. It almost seemed as if it were searching, seeking out the one lone hiker who'd carelessly ventured into the open. I glanced at my watch, and based on the time that had lapsed since I departed the lookout tower, I knew I was a mere 10 minutes from the safety of my truck. It's important to note that the hike to the tower takes approximately 45 minutes, as one works against the elevation gain. Hiking down, especially when motivated by bolts of lightning flashing at your heels, takes less than 30. That is, if you know where you are. Unfortunately for me, Red Butte no longer looked like Red Butte. In fact, it didn't look like any place I'd ever been. Regardless of my lacking sense of direction or absence of any familiar terrain, I knew up from down and continued to quickly drop in elevation. Eventually, I tumbled off the butte and onto a dirt road. Knowing roads totally encircled the butte, I knew it would only be a matter of time before I encountered my patrol truck. I was drenched, but the power of the storm had ebbed, moving on to look for other unsuspecting victims in the east. I found my truck to be right where I'd left it, looking much cleaner after being blasted by heavy rains. The sun shone off its freshly washed exterior, and the towering butte above became familiar prominence once again. I loaded my gear, then slid in behind the steering wheel. The air conditioning blasted when I fired up the truck, but I immediately shut it off, finding the frigid air to be too cold for my damp body. That's when I noticed the dash clock. That can't be right. I looked at my watch, then my cell phone to verify. Somehow, since departing the top of Red Butte, nearly 4 hours had passed. But Red Butte wasn't the only time slip, vortex, dimensional shift, whatever you want to call it, I experienced in the Grand Canyon vicinity. A few months later, I walked into a dark area on the North Rim with 2 coworkers. What we found was disturbing, and speculation theorized that there was a relation between this ritual site and a missing park employee. I was dispatched to the origin of a human-caused fire in a remote section of forest outside the small, peculiar town of Kaibab, Utah. This sparsely populated dot on the map, located near the junction of highways 89 and 89A, serves as a last-stop shop for visitors to the North Rim. It's where I reserved my accommodation and met with the fire officer to discuss events surrounding the human-caused fire I'd be investigating. The fire officer, Jamie, was an old friend with whom I'd worked with earlier in my career, and I was grateful he specifically requested me for this assignment. Jamie, along with Cody, the fire prevention patrol for northern Kaibab, and I all arrived at the scene of the fire. We later confirmed that evidence supported an abandoned campfire as the cause. With no suspects or evidence leading to possible suspects, this ring of loosely placed rock and melted detritus would be another statistic in the annals of human-caused fires causing taxpayers additional dollars. My role in all of this was simply paperwork. "Hey," Cody said. "Since you're here, you want to see a creepy campsite I found in the woods?" This was an impromptu invite. To be honest, I think Cody was a little sheepish, even sharing his discovery with us. "Sure," I said. "And what makes it creepy?" "I just found some weird things in it. It's not right, like maybe devil worship or something." Jamie voiced his opinion, speaking through his teeth and reverting back to his Hispanic, streetwise accent. But I knew his curiosity wouldn't let it go. He had to see it for himself what strange oddities were found on this forest during his watch. So we all fell in line and followed Cody miles deeper into the ponderosa pines. We drove for roughly 20 minutes down a forest road that showed signs of monsoon damage, deep ruts and dislodged rock. Cody eased his pale green patrol truck to the edge of the road and parked in a clearing barely big enough for 1 vehicle, let alone 3. Nothing worthy of note was visible from where we'd parked, just a sea of pine, aspen, and high desert scrub. "It's about 100 yards through here." Cody tapped the air with his truck key in the direction of a primitive patch of mature forest. "Is there any kind of trail?" Jamie asked. "Not until you get beyond the trees along the road." Cody appeared uneasy. "Uh-huh, and how did you find this place?" I asked. "We had a bunch of lightning move through the area. I was patrolling for smoke and thought I saw a wisp pop up in the trees. I went in on foot looking for it. I didn't find any fire spots, but I did find some pretty crazy things, bones and carvings." Cody trailed off as he stepped into the tree line, and Jamie and I joined him. By all accounts, the forest seemed peaceful, even bright with the autumn aspen leaves a vibrant yellow against the dark green pine. The sky beyond the treetops was a rich, deep blue, and the sun low in the sky caused a few feathery clouds to blush. I breathed in the vanilla of warm ponderosa and the earthy dampness of the forest floor. Cody stopped and pointed to something hanging in the tree. A bleached white cow skull hung from a bent nail hammered into a trunk. "This is the first thing I noticed." I didn't consider a cow skull to be particularly alarming. In my experience, it wasn't unusual for hunters and hikers to locate a perfectly intact animal skull. then display it in some similar fashion for the next passerby to see. I'd done it myself. I will admit, though, this cow skull seemed to be in extraordinarily good shape, not like the weathered and brittle bones I'd found on one of my wandering forest walks. Cody walked around to the other side of the tree and gestured upward. I peered up into the pine boughs and saw several large bones tied to branches with twine. Like the skull, the bones were extremely clean, and some still had bright pink tissue in their joints. Beside the tree was an old stump, likely from the logging days of the early 1900s. Perched on the top of the stump was a carved, wooden hand, holding a smooth, round rock. Beside it was a pelvis bone. It, too, had a pure, clean whiteness to it, with bright pink tissue in its crevices. All around us were strange markings, symbols, small effigies built from twigs, more carvings, and many more bones. What kind of freak did this? I'm guessing someone inspired by the Blair Witch Project? It seemed a little too perfect to me. Still, the time it took for the carvings, the bones high in the trees, the rock cairns and symbols, led me to believe this wasn't someone's impromptu scare tactic. This took time, days, maybe even weeks. It goes all the way back into a box canyon, Cody said, then ducked beneath a crude archway compromised of bent, twisted branches and more jute twine. The archway was more of a facade. It didn't lean to any specific area or exhibit. It was just an obstacle that spanned the trail and acted as a sort of terminus for anyone who managed to find this obscure site. Hey, can you work up an incident report on this? Jamie asked. I can, but on what criminal grounds? I suppose we can cite resource damage for the nails in the trees or abandoned property for the carvings, but it's a bit of a stretch. I don't care, Jamie replied. I want a number generated on this so we can continue to track its activity. Something's going on out here that shouldn't be. I took more photographs and bagged one of the fresher-looking bones, then flipped open my leather ticket book to fill in the preliminary information from my report. As we started the hike back to our vehicles, we ducked once more beneath the twig and twine arch, but this time through it was different. The trail suddenly seemed to narrow, and the space around me closed in on all sides, as though the mouth of an archway was slowly closing in on its prey. Even with all the strange things swirling around this remote site, I dismissed my experience as a delusion of sorts, brought about by a lack of coffee and sleep. That is, until Jamie piped up, asking if anyone else felt really odd walking under those sticks. You felt that too? Cody asked. With my experience validated, I spoke up as well. Yeah, I felt like once we walked over that thing, the whole forest started to close off. Yeah, Cody said, like something's trying to keep us from leaving. Okay, let's get the hell out of here and come back with more people and more daylight, Jamie said. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely disturbed by the sight or if he wanted to ensure he was back in his comfortable office when it came to clock out. Maybe both. I entered my reports into the agency database and left any further follow-up with law enforcement personnel on the north side. I don't know whatever developed from this incident, other than 2 employees later visiting the site, stumbling upon what looked like a freshly dug grave. They excavated enough dirt to determine that the soil held much more moisture than the ground around it. Some speculated that it might be a beloved pet that was buried. Others thought it might be a park employee that went missing months earlier. To my knowledge, no remains were ever recovered, and the site's origin and purpose remains a mystery. Park employees, natives, and a handful of seasonal residents will tell you that the Grand Canyon is a chasm brimming with strange lights and ghostly anomalies, both of which I have witnessed firsthand. One night in early March, Lena and I were coming back from Desert View Watchtower, the easternmost development on the South Rim. We pulled out at an abandoned overlook to marvel at the Grand Canyon's geologic spires and sharp cliffs, all illuminated by the moon's milky light. Standing before such immense, frightful beauty at night, it was only natural to broach the topic of UFOs and strange phenomena. I shared what one park ranger had told me about the lights flashing and darting through the canyon, appearing and disappearing, as if consciously putting on a show for passers-by. Then, as if on cue, we noticed a flicker in a strand of pinyon junipers. The scraggly trees were gathered on a narrow precipice that reached precariously over the edge, the Colorado River frothing and tumbling a mile below. Bright white and yellow lights, with almost liquid consistency, bobbed and dripped down the trees. After several seconds of playful movement, the lights circled together and flew out over the canyon where they disappeared. For a moment, we stood there, awestruck, as though trying to register whether this was an authentic, anomalous sighting, or some contrived display put on by the other. "Are you kidding me?" Lena asked. Filled with utter surprise, I let out a sharp laugh. "I can't believe we just saw that." We waited for a while longer to see whether any additional lights would manifest, but 20 minutes in we decided there wouldn't be an encore. We would, however, see strange lights again, next time in an offshoot from the main trail leading to Havasu Falls. The Grand Canyon will never be fully understood. Its layered history, geologic signs of catastrophic flooding, native folklore, strange lights, and purported dimensional shifts make it an untamed destination that should be approached with a high degree of caution. Share your hiking itinerary with friends and family. Carry emergency supplies. And if you ever hear disembodied voices carried on in the wind, stick hard and fast to the well-traveled trails